January 1940. The icy waters of the North Atlantic churned with the wakes of German U-boats. Steel predators glided silently beneath the waves, surfacing only to strike. Allied convoys, laden with food, fuel, and weapons, were easy prey. Torpedoes streaked through the dark, splitting freighters in half, sending men and cargo into the freezing sea. The Royal Navy, stretched thin, fought desperately to defend the lifeline that kept Britain alive. But time and again, the enemy seemed to know their every move. At the center of this invisible war was a machine. Small enough to fit in a satchel, it carried the power to decide the fate of nations. The Germans called it Enigma. It was no ordinary cipher. Rows of keys, like a typewriter, pressed letters that flashed up as entirely different characters. Behind its face lay a complex system of rotors and wiring, which shifted with each keystroke. Every day, the settings changed, reset with new configurations that produced over 150 quintillion possible combinations. To its operators, Enigma was foolproof. To their enemies, it was impenetrable. For the Kriegsmarine, it was more than just a communications tool. It was a shield. Orders from Berlin traveled to U-boat wolf packs without fear of interception. When Allied ships sailed, German captains already knew their coordinates. Winston Churchill would later recall, "The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril." That peril was magnified by Enigma's shroud of secrecy. In the darkened operations rooms of London, Allied intelligence pored over intercepted signals. Crackling Morse code carried fragments of German radio traffic across the ether, yet none of it could be read. Endless pages of gibberish streamed in, encrypted into nonsense strings of letters that mocked every attempt at decryption. Mathematicians, linguists, and cryptanalysts all tried and failed. The suspense grew with each convoy lost. Britain, cut off from continental Europe since the fall of Poland in 1939, now faced starvation. By early 1940, the nation imported the majority of its food by sea. Without access to the Atlantic, Britain would wither. Every day that Enigma remained unbroken, the noose tightened. Cinematically, one might picture the machine itself, keys pressed by gloved hands in the cramped radio room of a U-boat, the whir of rotors, the dim red glow of a lamp swinging overhead. Somewhere else, on a freezing Atlantic deck, a sailor scanned the horizon, unaware that his enemy already knew where he sailed, already prepared to strike. A British code clerk later remembered the sense of futility. "We listened to them every day, filling notebooks with their chatter. We knew the answers were there, but locked inside Enigma, we could do nothing." To the Germans, confidence reigned. They boasted that Enigma was mathematically unbreakable. Even if the Allies captured one, without the ever-changing daily keys, it was useless. Hitler's officers trusted the device completely, allowing them to maneuver armies and fleets with deadly precision. The stakes could not have been higher. If Enigma remained unsolved, Britain risked being starved into surrender. If it could be broken, the Allies might finally pierce the fog of war, reading the Reich's most secret thoughts. This was the crossroads in January 1940, a war balanced on the edge of a cipher machine. The Allies had the will, but did they have the genius required to confront the machine of secrets? What began as a battle of ships and guns would now shift into a battle of wits. One fought not in trenches or skies, but in the quiet of offices, in the scratch of chalk on blackboards, and the hum of strange new machines. The war's future would depend on whether the unbreakable code could, in fact, be broken. And so, the story of Bletchley Park, and the men and women who dared to take on Enigma, was about to begin. Long before the quiet lawns of Bletchley Park filled with the hum of typewriters and the whir of machines, the first blows against Enigma were struck in Warsaw. In the early 1930s, while Europe teetered between fragile peace and looming conflict, three young Polish mathematicians dared to attack what seemed to be an impossible riddle. Their names were Marian Rejewski, Jerzy Rzycki, and Henryk Zygalski. Poland, squeezed between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, understood better than most the stakes of deciphering German intentions. The Polish Cipher Bureau recognized that traditional linguists could not solve the Enigma puzzle. Instead, they turned to mathematics, abstract reasoning against mechanical secrecy. Rejewski, drawing on pure mathematical theory, achieved the first great breakthrough in 1932. By analyzing intercepted messages and exploiting procedural flaws in German operations, he reconstructed Enigma's internal wiring without ever having seen its schematics. His colleagues, Rositzky and Zygalski, built upon his work, devising methods to track rotor settings and anticipate key changes. Their ingenuity gave birth to pioneering tools. The most famous was the Bomba Cryptologiczna, a machine that automated parts of the decryption process by testing possible rotor combinations. Though crude compared to the later British bomb, it marked the first time humans had created a mechanical counter to the German cipher. Alongside it were Zygalski's perforated sheets, mathematical grids that helped narrow down possible daily keys. In those years, the Polish cryptanalysts achieved the unthinkable. They read Enigma traffic. For a time, Polish intelligence had a window into German rearmament and troop movements. But the victory was fragile. In 1938, the Germans introduced additional rotors and refined their procedures, multiplying the possible settings exponentially. Each adjustment pushed Enigma closer to the realm of the unbreakable. By the summer of 1939, war was imminent. Poland knew it could not stand alone. On July 25, 1939, just weeks before the German invasion, the Polish Cipher Bureau invited representatives from France and Britain to a secret meeting outside Warsaw. There, the Poles revealed what they had accomplished and handed over their methods, replicas of the Enigma machine and the designs for the Bomba. A French officer present later recalled the moment. It was as though a curtain had lifted. We suddenly understood that what we thought impossible had already been done. For British intelligence, this was a revelation. Without Poland's gift, Bletchley Park would have started blind. When Germany invaded Poland on September 1, 1939, the Polish cryptanalysts were forced to flee. Rositzky would later perish when his ship was torpedoed in 1942. Zygalski and Rejewski carried on their work in exile, but their contributions faded into obscurity as Britain assumed the mantle of the code-breaking war. Cinematically, one might imagine the contrast. Warsaw in the 1930s, chalkboards crowded with equations, sheets of numbers pinned to walls, and three young men hunched over a cipher machine, quietly reshaping the course of history. Then, just months later, their homeland engulfed in flames, their laboratories destroyed, and their work carried across borders to survive in foreign hands. Their story is one of brilliance overshadowed by circumstance. Bletchley Park would later achieve global recognition, but the first cracks in Enigma's armor had been struck years before by Polish minds. The machines Britain built, the methods that Alan Turing would refine, all traced their lineage back to Rejewski, Rositzky, and Zygalski. As Britain prepared to take up the challenge of Enigma in earnest, it did so standing on Polish shoulders. The forgotten pioneers had bought the Allies' precious time and passed the torch to those who would finish the fight. From this foundation, the story now shifts to Bletchley Park, where secrecy, mathematics, and machines would converge into one of the greatest intelligence triumphs of the 20th century. In the rolling fields of Buckinghamshire, just 50 miles from London, stood a Victorian country house with gabled roofs and ornate brickwork. At first glance, Bletchley Park looked like the estate of a wealthy industrialist, calm, secluded, unremarkable. Yet behind its ivy-clad walls, this mansion became the nerve center of one of the most closely guarded secrets of the Second World War. By late 1939, after the fall of Poland and the outbreak of global war, Britain knew it faced a deadly problem. German U-boats prowled the Atlantic, guided by messages encrypted with the Enigma machine. If these codes could not be broken, Britain's lifeline of food, fuel, and weapons across the ocean would be severed. The solution lay in this quiet estate, commandeered by British intelligence and transformed into a fortress of secrecy. The work was monumental. Intercept stations scattered across Britain, known as WWII stations, captured endless streams of German radio traffic. Each day, sacks of intercepts arrived at Bletchley Park, where teams of codebreakers labored in cramped wooden huts. Their task was to wrest order from chaos, to strip away Enigma's shifting layers of deception and reveal the enemy's plans. Life inside Bletchley was unlike anything seen before. In Hut 6, mathematicians attacked the daily Enigma keys. In Hut 8, under the direction of Alan Turing, analysts focused on the naval Enigma, the most complex and deadly of all. Turing, a brilliant Cambridge mathematician, believed that only machines could keep pace with Enigma's billions of possible combinations. His colleague Gordon Welchman proposed structural innovations that made such machines feasible. Nearby, the veteran cryptanalyst Dilly Knox, already in his 50s, worked with quiet determination. Knox's brilliance lay in intuition and linguistic insight. He trained young women, often recruited from Oxford and Cambridge, in the delicate art of pattern recognition. The workforce grew rapidly. By 1944, more than 9,000 men and women served at Bletchley, most of them young women employed as clerks, translators, or machine operators. Eyewitnesses remembered the relentless pace. One wireless operator later described the constant sound of Morse intercepts. The tapping never stopped, like the heartbeat of the war. Another recalled the atmosphere of urgency, where even a small breakthrough could mean thousands of lives saved at sea. The huts themselves became legendary. Cold in winter, sweltering in summer, they were packed with papers, typewriters, and the strange mechanical devices that would evolve into code-breaking machines. Operators worked in 12-hour shifts, their eyes stinging from cigarette smoke, their minds dulled by monotony, yet always aware that their task was vital. At the heart of Bletchley's innovation was the bomb, an electromechanical machine based on the earlier Polish design but vastly improved by Turing and Welchman. The bomb tested thousands of possible rotor settings at speed, searching for logical contradictions that could expose the day's Enigma key. Banks of bombs were installed in nearby facilities, their clattering wheels and snapping relays echoing through the night. But Bletchley was more than machines. It was a place where intellect, imagination, and secrecy fused into a single effort. Strict compartmentalization meant that most staff knew only fragments of the work, never the whole picture. Even decades later, many veterans confessed they had no idea they were contributing to the breaking of Enigma itself. The secrecy was absolute. Letters home were censored. Conversations outside the gates were forbidden. One veteran remembered how you learned to hold your tongue, even with your closest friends, because silence itself was part of the fight. From the outside, Bletchley Park looked serene, with bicycles leaning against hedges and staff strolling the grounds during brief breaks. Yet inside, the mansion and its huts pulsed with hidden urgency. Every decrypted message could tip the balance. A convoy spared from ambush, a battle fought with forewarning, a life saved. Here, in this unlikely country estate, the Allies built the foundation for victory against the machine that once seemed unbreakable. And it was within these cramped huts and humming machines that the next chapter of the Enigma War would unfold, a battle of intellects that would shape the fate of nations. In the dimly lit huts of Bletchley Park, silence was broken not only by the tap of typewriter keys, but by a new, mechanical rhythm, the clatter of machines built to fight an enemy unlike any other. Against the German Enigma, a cipher that shifted with every keystroke and reset its secrets at midnight, human intellect alone was not enough. What was needed was speed, machines that could think faster than any man. Alan Turing, already renowned for his mathematical brilliance, recognized the scale of the challenge. Enigma's daily combinations numbered in the trillions. A single mistake in the decoding process could mean ships lost at sea or soldiers walking blindly into ambush. Working with Gordon Welchman, Turing set about refining an idea first pioneered by the Polish cryptanalysts, an electromechanical device capable of running through rotor settings at unprecedented speed. The result was the bomb. The bomb was no ordinary machine. Standing taller than a man and stretching several feet in length, it was a forest of drums, wires, and switches. Each unit simulated dozens of Enigma machines running simultaneously, its rotating cylinders spinning with a relentless hum. When connected to a crib, a likely guess about the contents of a German message, the bomb could test thousands of possibilities in minutes, narrowing the solution to a manageable set of keys. But even with this innovation, time was the enemy. Enigma keys changed every 24 hours. Every night at midnight, the slate was wiped clean. If Bletchley failed to find the settings by morning, all intercepted traffic for that day became useless. It was a race against the clock, one veteran later recalled. A desperate chase where every hour meant lives. By 1941, the first operational bomb, nicknamed Victory, was installed at Bletchley. Its success led to an explosion of demand. Soon, the work outgrew the cramped huts. Entire facilities were devoted to housing rows of bombs, their wheels spinning day and night, filling the air with the sound of grinding relays and clicking circuits. At peak production, over 200 bombs were built, many installed at outstations such as Eastcote and Stanmore. The machines required operators, mostly young women from the Women's Royal Naval Service, the Wrens. They worked in exhausting shifts, monitoring the bombs, adjusting wiring panels, and recording results. The work was repetitive and physically demanding, but its consequences were immense. As one Wren later explained, "We knew nothing of the details. We only knew that if we didn't keep the machines going, men might die at sea." Inside Bletchley, once the bombs produced a likely set of rotor settings, cryptanalysts leapt into action. Messages were decrypted, translated, and rushed to the desks of military planners. A breakthrough could mean the difference between a convoy annihilated by U-boats or safely reaching Britain's ports. The sheer scale of the operation was staggering. By the end of the war, the bombs were processing thousands of intercepted messages daily, stripping away the veil of secrecy from the Reich's war machine. The effort consumed resources, manpower, and secrecy, yet it remained one of Britain's most closely guarded advantages. Still, the work was never free of tension. Not every day brought success. Some keys eluded capture until too late, and the staff felt the weight of failure in the reports of sunken ships and lost men. Yet each new bomb brought greater speed, greater certainty, and greater hope. Here, in the clash of steel drums and electric currents, a machine fought against a machine. The Germans trusted Enigma to shield their empire. The Allies trusted the bombs to tear that shield apart. And as their wheels spun through the night, the tide of war began, slowly, to turn. What followed would prove the power of these machines, as their discoveries rippled outward to the Atlantic, to North Africa, and to the very heart of Hitler's war plans. The struggle against Enigma was far from over, but for the first time, the Allies had seized the initiative. The Atlantic Ocean was the lifeline of Britain. Every ton of food, fuel, and ammunition that crossed its waters meant survival for an island under siege. Yet beneath the waves lurked a shadow fleet, Germany's U-boats. Sleek, predatory, and lethal, they prowled in wolf packs, striking convoys under cover of night and slipping back into the dark sea. Between 1940 and 1943, more than 2,000 Allied merchant ships were sunk, threatening to starve Britain into submission. But by 1941, the secret work of Bletchley Park began to tilt the balance. With Enigma's codes broken, intercepted signals, codenamed Ultra, revealed the locations and intentions of U-boat groups. For the first time, the Allies could see into the depths of the Reich's most dangerous weapon. The Battle of the Atlantic was no longer fought blindly. It became a contest of signals, strategy, and secrecy. Convoy commanders were handed precise orders to alter course, often without explanation. A sudden change of direction in the night could mean the difference between life and death. One sailor later recalled, "We asked no questions. If the captain steered us north instead of east, we trusted it. And when we reached empty seas where death had been waiting, we understood that someone, somewhere, was watching over us." Yet ultra-intelligence was fragile, and its source had to remain hidden. If the Germans ever suspected Enigma was compromised, they would alter their systems, plunging the Allies back into silence. To protect the secret, British planners sometimes allowed convoys to remain exposed, even at terrible cost, rather than risk revealing their advantage. The weight of that decision haunted those in command, a brutal reminder that secrecy itself was a weapon. Meanwhile, in the icy waters of the North Atlantic, the struggle grew more violent. Convoys were escorted by destroyers, corvettes, and aircraft, armed with depth charges that thundered through the depths. Once Ultra revealed the presence of a wolf pack, escorts could strike first. Reports described German submarines caught by surprise, shattered by explosions before they could line up their attacks. To the sailors above, the sight of oil slicks and debris rising to the surface was proof that the tables were turning. The numbers told the story. In 1942 alone, U-boats sank over 1,000 Allied ships, their happy time, as German commanders called it. But by mid-1943, with ultra-guiding convoys and long-range Allied aircraft closing the mid-Atlantic gap, losses fell dramatically. U-boat crews, once hunters, became the hunted. Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of the Kriegsmarine's submarine fleet, admitted later that the sudden collapse of their successes was incomprehensible at the time. Still, to the men at sea, the battle remained personal and terrifying. Convoys stretched for miles across gray waters. Merchant ships loaded with supplies bound for Liverpool, Glasgow, or London. At night, sailors strained their eyes against the black horizon, fearing the sudden bloom of torpedoes. Even with Ultra's guidance, many convoys were still attacked, and the sea claimed thousands. Survivors clung to lifeboats in freezing water, whispering prayers that help would arrive. Behind it all, in the huts of Bletchley, the race continued. Every new Enigma, key broken meant another day of survival. The link between mathematics on paper and blood in the water was never clearer. As one REN operator later reflected, "We never saw the ships we saved, but we knew they were out there, alive, because of what came through our machines." By the summer of 1943, the tide had turned. The Allies sank more U-boats than Germany could replace, and the once proud wolf packs dwindled into scattered survivors. Britain's supply lines were secured, and with them, the hope of ultimate victory. The Battle of the Atlantic was not won by ships or planes alone, but by signals in the deep, unseen messages that bridged the gap between silence and survival. The codebreakers of Bletchley Park had transformed the ocean from a graveyard into a lifeline, ensuring that Britain would endure and fight on. From this invisible triumph, the war effort surged forward, carrying the Allies closer to the day when Europe itself would be invaded. Breaking Enigma was only the beginning. The true challenge lay not in unlocking the Reich's secrets, but in ensuring the enemy never realized their fortress of ciphers had been breached. For Bletchley Park, secrecy was not an accessory to victory. It was its very foundation. To protect ultra-intelligence, the Allies built a labyrinth of deception. Naval commanders were instructed to stage reconnaissance flights over areas where Enigma had already revealed the presence of U-boats, so that German observers would attribute the detection to patrol aircraft, not broken codes. In some cases, convoys were allowed to sail into danger, losses accepted with a heavy heart, all to preserve the illusion of German security. One British officer later confessed, "It was unbearable at times. We knew, but we could never act. The secret had to survive, even if men did not." This secrecy extended far beyond the Atlantic. In the North African campaign of 1942, ultra-decrypts revealed Rommel's supply lines stretched across the Mediterranean, vulnerable to attack. Yet rather than simply strike, the Allies cloaked their actions in plausible cover stories. Reconnaissance aircraft were flown in deliberate patterns, ensuring that when Axis fuel convoys were destroyed, the Germans believed they had been spotted from the air. General Bernard Montgomery's victories at El Alamein were sharpened by this hidden knowledge, but publicly credited to traditional scouting and battlefield maneuver. The deception also shaped the greatest gamble of the war, the invasion of Normandy. In the months leading to D-Day, June 1944, Bletchley Park intercepted German deployments, confirming that Hitler remained convinced the main Allied landing would come at the Pas de Calais. Ultra-intelligence guided Operation Fortitude, a sprawling web of false radio traffic, phantom divisions, and double agents. German high command held elite units in the wrong location even after the beaches of Normandy were stormed, a hesitation that proved catastrophic. But the cost of silence remained constant. In Europe's occupied territories, resistance networks sent desperate signals, often betrayed by German counterintelligence. Bletchley sometimes intercepted messages revealing their impending arrests, but to act would have exposed the source. The codebreakers bore the invisible weight of these choices. "We had knowledge like a sword," one veteran later recalled, "but sometimes we had to sheath it and let the blow fall." Ultra's secrecy was maintained with fanatical discipline. Only a handful of commanders were cleared to know the truth. Messages decrypted at Bletchley were stripped of their origins before being passed down the chain of command. Officers receiving orders often believed they were following traditional intelligence, never realizing that their decisions were guided by a silent army of cryptanalysts hidden away in Buckinghamshire. The Germans, for their part, never suspected. Enigma was considered impregnable, its daily key changes producing more than 150 trillion possible combinations. German officers trusted it absolutely, even when defeats piled up with uncanny precision. Their faith in the machine became their undoing. The shadow war of secrecy and deception ensured that Ultra's power endured until the final days of the conflict. Every battle shaped by Bletchley carried with it the paradox of silence. Lives lost in the short term to protect a secret that saved millions in the long run. As the war moved toward its climax, one truth became clear. The most decisive victories were often won not by guns, but by silence, a silence that whispered across the airwaves, reshaping history from the shadows. By the summer of 1945, the guns of Europe had fallen silent. Cities lay in ruins, millions were displaced, and entire nations were scarred by 6 years of total war. Yet buried beneath the rubble and remembrance was a secret that had tilted the balance of the conflict: the triumph of Bletchley Park. Historians later estimated that ultra-intelligence shortened the war by 2 to 4 years, sparing perhaps 14 million lives that might otherwise have been lost in drawn-out campaigns. Convoys that reached their destinations, invasions that struck the right beaches, and ambushes avoided, all owed their survival to the quiet work of those in Buckinghamshire. And yet, when the war ended, there were no parades for the codebreakers. No medals pinned on the clerks who sorted endless intercepts. No public applause for the mathematicians who broke the Reich's most guarded secrets. They had been sworn to silence under the Official Secrets Act. For decades, veterans of Bletchley Park carried their memories in silence, unable to speak even to their families about the victories they had won in the shadows. One operator later recalled, "We left Bletchley and returned to ordinary life. The world moved on, never knowing what we had done." Alan Turing, the brilliant architect of the bomb, met a tragic fate. Despite his wartime contributions, he was prosecuted in 1952 for his homosexuality, then criminalized in Britain. He died 2 years later, his genius largely unrecognized. Only decades later would his name be restored, his face appearing on banknotes, his story told as one of the defining tales of modern science and war. The women of Bletchley, 1,000 strong, returned to obscurity as well. They had staffed the intercept stations, run the machines, translated German messages, and carried the burden of secrecy with as much weight as any general. Their work was dismissed as clerical, though without them, the machines would have stood silent. It would take generations before their stories were finally told, reclaiming their place in the tapestry of victory. Bletchley Park itself fell quiet after 1945. The huts where history had been written decayed, their wooden frames rotting in the English rain. The mansion's halls emptied of their wartime bustle, its rooms once filled with the rhythm of intercepted signals now echoing with silence. For years, few knew what had transpired there. To the world, it was just another country estate. Only in the late 20th century did the truth emerge. Declassified documents revealed the scale of Ultra's success and the hidden army of mathematicians, linguists, engineers, and clerks who had quietly altered the trajectory of the modern world. Historians began to recognize that the great battles of the Atlantic, North Africa, and Normandy had been shaped not just by tanks and aircraft, but by the clatter of typewriters and the click of rotors inside dimly lit huts. The legacy of Bletchley Park endures today not in military parades, but in the technologies it foreshadowed. The bomb and Colossus machines laid the groundwork for modern computing. The methods of pattern recognition, logic, and automation pioneered there became the foundation of the digital age. From the rattle of Enigma's rotors to the hum of today's processors, the thread of history runs through Bletchley's secret work. And yet, the greatest legacy was silence. For decades, veterans carried their burden without recognition, their contribution to peace left unspoken. They knew that their war had not been fought for glory, but for survival. The story circles back to where it began. The Enigma machine, once thought invincible. Its mechanical rattle had once carried the commands of conquest across Europe's skies and seas. But in the end, it was defeated not by bombs or bullets, but by human ingenuity, by the quiet persistence of those who refused to accept the impossible. Bletchley Park's victory was unseen, uncelebrated, and unspoken. But it was victory nonetheless, one measured not in headlines, but in the lives saved and in the peace that followed. And though history was slow to remember them, the echo of their triumph endures, a reminder that even in the darkest hours, brilliance and determination can turn the tide of war.